The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.
Welcome to the Tim Heale Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to have a chat with Doug. So, Doug, if you can tell me when and where you were born, and if you can describe to me what it was like where you grew up, the schools you went to, and the education that you received.
Sure, Tim. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. As you're eventually going to tell, I have a bit of my own accent. I am a native Texan. I was born in the large town of Houston, Texas, but did not grow up here. At a very early age, my family moved to San Antonio, which is about 3 hours to our west out of Houston. I had all my early schooling years in San Antonio. I was actually raised the only child of a single mom. My father had passed at a very early age. He died when I was 2 years old. He had some liver trouble and passed away. So at 2 years old, I really never knew who he was. But growing up in San Antonio was a great adventure. It was a great place to grow up. At the time in history, San Antonio had 5 military bases.
Wow.
So just about everybody you ever got to meet or know had something to do with the military. Either they were married to a military service member or had a relative or something. So it was a very predominant theme in the area. For me,
what sort of area was that?
I'm sorry?
What sort of area was that?
I'm
guessing about sort of the early, maybe mid-90s, something like that.
1960s. 1960s, 60s and 70s.
All right.
So
San Antonio at that time then, what sort of military was there? Is it a coastal town?
No, it's
inland, isn't it?
Central Texas. Very inland, very hot most of the time. It was a so-called dry heat if we had heat. Because we were inland, we didn't get any of the Gulf Coast effects. The Texas Gulf Coast gets quite a bit of climate change on a regular basis. And every once in a while, the infamous hurricane blows up and creates weather events for us. But it's part of living in the territory here. We're kind of a catcher's mitt for hurricanes.
Yeah. So the military bases then, were they predominantly Army or were they Marines or was it Air Force?
There
was it a mixture?
There were 2 air bases, actually, 2 air bases, principally Lackland, which is where to this day Air Force basic training happens in the U.S., Lackland Air Force Base. Then there was a pilot training center called Randolph, and I actually lived not far from that base. There was a large military base, their Army base there, named Fort Sam Houston. That's Army Medical Center. So a lot of the training for doctors and nurses and specialties in the Army medicine are done out of Fort Sam Houston. Fort Sam still exists. Randolph still exists. Lackland still exists. There were 2 other lesser bases that went away about 30 years ago.
So growing up in that area then with a large sort of military presence, I guess, did you have anything to do with the military?
I did. For me, it became quite a motivator. I was interested very much in pursuing a military career when I was younger. I took first steps toward that goal by joining the high school ROTC unit. It's called ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps. And we would wear uniforms to school, and we had military science classes, and we conducted military oriented activities and learning a lot of the basics. how to read a map, how to read a compass, how to shoot a rifle, and do some other things. And being a member of that program for 3 years in high school set me up for college opportunity. Um,
Can I just take you back to around your elementary or your middle school, and have a look at what you were doing at that time?
Yeah, nothing particularly dramatic then in elementary. I did change schools 3 times as an elementary student. That's for us, it was first through 6th grade. I tell a life story that had a long-term effect on me when I made that second transfer. The district we moved into was considered one of the higher rated districts. Their standards were much greater. I was only in 2nd grade, but I was moving in the middle of the spring semester, which back in those days we had 6 week terms in the school year. I was moving in the middle of the 5th one, which is a bad time to move.
Is there a good time to move?
The school informed me that in order for me to be passed on to the 3rd grade in their program, I had to make up all of the reading book workbook assignments for the whole year
Wow.
in a 6 week and a half, well, so a 9 week time frame. I went on a crash course of reading little books that they weren't more mature than a 2nd grader would do. But I tell the story that jaundiced me toward reading. I hated reading. I to this day as an adult, I struggle with that. I am not a person that just says, "Oh, goody goody, here's the latest greatest book. I just can't wait to turn the page and crack this open." Now, does that say I don't read at all? No. I mean, I read well. I'm not stymied as far as my reading ability, but my passion and interest for it is a real struggle.
Well, I'm on the other side of the fence there. I suffer from dyslexia, which is it's a little bit of a debilitating thing when it comes to reading. I mean, I quite like reading. I mean, if there's a book that I'm interested in, I'll persevere and I'll read it. I used to collect an awful lot of escape stories from the Second World War, and I was an avid reader of those. And me and my best mate, we used to go around bookshops and we'd try and get first covers and stuff like that for these books, and we would read them and we'd share them. And then when the Harry Potters come out, I've read all the Harry Potters 2 or 3 times. It just takes me quite a bit of time to read because of the dyslexia. The words kind of get jumbled up a little bit, but I mean it's something that I occasionally like to do if I've got an interest in that particular book.
Well, I've often said that I might have ended up going to law school were it not for the reading requirements. I actually pondered that possibility at great length and then realized that for all the reading that it would require, I just wasn't interested. But again, it's not to say I can't. I just my hunger for it is really a struggle. Now, what I've found through my adult life, I go through these odd periods where I am hungry to read. I'll read a whole collection of author books. I've got about 6 bookshelves. I'm looking above me here. My bookshelf is right in front of me here as we're speaking. I've read a whole collection of fiction and mystery novels and things like that. I'll get hooked on them and I'll go well, but then 6 or 7 months into that cycle, all of a sudden it's like, nah, not today. I'm done. And it goes away.
So, the elementary school then, so you were over keen on reading, but how did you get on at the end of that semester?
Just
Did you?
fine. I passed all the requirements, and I was elevated to the third grade, and everything beyond that was just fine. Very very normal. I even as a young child, I was an extracurricular kid. I was excited to do everything possible that was outside of the classroom in school. I My wife teases me to this day. I got my sights set on a role at the elementary school. I wanted to be captain of the crossing guards. We Back in
Mm,
those days, we let students um, help administer the school crossings, and there was training, and there was, we had all the right reflective gear and signs and so forth, so that we weren't just young children standing in traffic, and there were adult supervisors out there, but
mm,
that was a thing, and it's part of the education program that helped people learn leadership and service to the community and those kinds of things. And I was just always enthralled doing that. It wasn't
mm.
about the badge or the color of my shield, but it was just the idea of being out there and being able to help. That was a thing that I identified early on in my life, and it stayed with me all the way through middle school. I ran for student council office and became a class leader, and through that had to serve in various extracurricular roles and capabilities.
Mm.
I figured out early on I was not particularly athletic. I tried out for the middle school basketball team, and my coach actually said, "You really cannot chew gum and walk at the same time."
So did you play any other sport other than
No, I
football?
did not. I never did. I mean, just, my own extracurricular. I played tennis and golf and things like that, but never competitive team sport.
Mm. So what was your favourite subject in middle school?
Middle school favorite subject. I actually would say for middle school, it was math. I had an instructor that became a mentor, and he made it interesting, he made it exciting, and made it fun, and that was probably my best one then.
Mm. So people fall on two sides of the fence with math. They either love it or hate it.
Yeah, yeah.
What was your worst subject then? Which one did you not like going to?
Well, I did not like going to phys ed. That was the gym class. That was a requirement, and I had already alienated myself with the coaches, and it wasn't fun to go do that.
So sort of track and field, and I guess in the summer months, and then it's just football in the winter months. So
Oh
you didn't
yeah,
shine at any of that then.
no, no, didn't enjoy any of that.
Fair one. So moving on then, your graduation from middle school to go to, was it high school or middle high?
Um,
Junior
we
high.
had a 2 year, we called it junior high, or nowadays they call it middle school here. It was only a 2 year program. Our district had gone through a bit of a transition, so the high school was a 4 year program. So ninth, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade was considered high school. So I was only in middle school for 2 years, then moved over to the high school.
Mm. And did you get to choose what subjects you did, or were they
No, not
just the
so much.
compulsory stuff?
No, not we in our high school program. It was fairly prescribed. I was placed in advanced classes because of all the test scores that were done. Um, Today, I think in at least in the U.S. education system, they consider them advanced placement classes or AP
Mm.
classes. We didn't call it that then. It was just simply accelerated, and all of the core subjects, math, science, English, and even history, was given an elevated course. And effectively, what it meant, if I stayed that in that program, which I did, by the time I was a senior, I was taking college level classes at high school.
So if you didn't shine at sports, did you do theatre or music as an
No,
alternative?
for me, as I mentioned earlier, the program that I opted for was the ROTC, the military science. We did have some special units. We had what was called a drill team. It was a marching group. We did a precision marching with rifles, and you've probably seen them in parades. They're
Yeah.
spinning the rifles and throwing the rifles and doing things like that. And that's what I opted to go for.
Yes, of course. Us in the British Army don't do that sort of drill.
Yeah.
we do proper drill.
Well, our team, when we went to competition, we were required to do the prescribed, drill by the book.
Yeah.
We had to demonstrate that capacity, but then there was always an opportunity for a exhibition drill routine that was custom designed, custom oriented, and graded accordingly. Yeah.
So how did the team do? Did you win any major competitions or?
We did. We won our district competition and several other events. My senior year, I was commander of the team, and we won 5 different events, I believe, and plus our school district, 4 major high schools competed against each other at the district level, and we won that.
Excellent. So when you graduated from high school then, did you graduate with honours because you was on the accelerated program?
I did. However, I chuckle about this. I was what you might think of as honors like magna cum laude, summa cum laude. We didn't really talk about that at the high school, but we did spotlight the so-called top 10% of the class. And I was officially in the top 10% of the class, but like Ulysses S. Grant, I had the last slot in that top 10%.
Well, don't knock yourself.
There
At least
were
you wasn't 11th.
there were 520 students in my senior class, and I was number 52 in the class ranking. So I was exactly in the top 10%.
Better than most.
Yep.
So moving on to college, did you get a scholarship or did you have to work your way through?
Well, interesting story. I did end up ultimately getting a scholarship, but part of the backstory on that was because of some of my bias and interest in making military a career, I had fancied myself going to Texas A&M and joining the famous Corps of Cadets there at A&M. That had been I had a cousin that was about actually 12 years older than me who had gone to A&M, and I met him in his senior boots, the marquee trademark of the Corps. I was just mesmerized by that and said, I want to do that one day. That's my goal. And so that's what I'd always thought. Always cheered for A&M when they played football, etc., and was just convinced that's where I was going. My senior year in high school, because of some of the things I had accomplished, some of the instructors and mentors encouraged me to consider other options. And through a series of events, I met one day with the U.S. Secretary of Defense. He had come to San Antonio to tour the military bases, and the Department of Defense decided to do a PR day. They selected one high school cadet to be his aide for the day. and I got picked to be that cadet.
Oh,
And so I spent the day walking around in the entourage with the Secretary of Defense, and we were leaving lunch. And he asked me, he said, "Where do you want to go to school?" And I naively said, "I want to go to West Point." And he said, "Okay, done." And I kind of went, "Excuse me?" And he said, "No." He said, he pointed to one of the other guys in the entourage. He said, "When you get a minute, give them all your information." And I went, "Okay." So sure enough, um, I didn't have to go through congressional appointment and all that. I had a direct appointment from the Secretary of Defense to go to West Point.
wow.
The
Did you take it up?
I did not. The announcement letter arrived several weeks later, and when I had it in my hand, I was visibly shaken. And my mother said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "This letter means I'm not going to A&M." And she said, "Well, it could mean that, but it doesn't have to mean that. What do you really want to do?" And I said, "I really want to go to A&M." And she said, "Then tell them you're not coming to West Point." So I didn't go.
So did you go to A&M?
I did. I did. I was awarded an Army scholarship to go to A&M, and had the opportunity to do that. And then, of course, with the Army scholarship, I did owe the U.S. Army some service after school. So I was commissioned as second lieutenant, went into service, and was on active duty for 4 years.
Mm. So you didn't go to West Point then
No,
at all?
did not.
But could you have done after you finished at A&M?
Um, Possibly. I never really pursued that. I let my notice to them that I wasn't coming be the final word. So,
So let's have a look at your military career.
well, as history would have it, I entered active duty in the summer of 1975. And if you roll the clock, that was 2 years after the U.S. exited Vietnam. We pulled troops out of Vietnam in 1973. And see, half of my college career, I was expecting to put on my lieutenant bars and ship out to Vietnam. That was what was going to happen.
Hmm.
But in the middle of my college, the U.S. pulled out of Vietnam, exited that war. And when I commissioned and went on active duty in 1975, being there the 4 years I was happens to be one of the very brief points in U.S. military history when we were not engaged in a major action anywhere in the globe. There were some skirmishes and there were some other things that were going on. There was a little skerfuffle down in Panama, and there was some, I believe the Brits had their experience in Grenada and a few other places. But by and large, I was on duty during peacetime.
Hmm. So where was your first posting? Where was your first draft?
I went to a school, a specialty school at Fort Lee, Virginia. I was in Virginia for about 6 months doing two training programs, actually. And the Army placed me in what ultimately became, well, it was the Quartermaster Corps, but even within the Quartermaster Corps, I chose a food service specialty. So I was trained at the Army Food School. And by the way, you'll take interest in this. While I was at the Army Food School, when we got to the portion of the school about pastries and baking, we had an exchange instructor from the Queen's Guard. She was the Queen's chief. He was the Queen's chief baker.
Ah.
and he was
From the
my
Army Catering Corps, no doubt.
he was my instructor at the Army Food School. So I learned how to make some of the most dazzling and amazing cinnamon rolls that you could ever imagine, all done by hand. But I was then transferred after all the schooling. I took a duty station at a place called Fort Rucker, Alabama, which is the Army flight school.
All right.
That's where they teach all of their helicopter pilots. And we did have some fixed wing aviation activity there. I was not a pilot. I did not go to the flight school to be trained as a pilot. I was a support officer on the base.
So you was a catering officer then?
For a time, only for a short time. I did that for about a year, and then I moved over to the housing office, and I ran the bachelor officer quarters, the 760 room hotel we had on base. So it was essentially hotel and hospitality.
So was that all part of the catering officer job that you trained for?
It was considered a correlation of that. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you ever get an overseas posting?
I did not.
I missed out. So you
I
could have ended up in Germany.
I protected Southeast Alabama from enemy attack, and we were very successful.
Excellent. So you just did your 4-year stint in the military, and did that pay back your tuition for putting you through the
It did.
Texas A&M?
Yes, it did.
So what did you do when you left the military? So I guess you're still classed as a veteran, so you get all the VA support and everything if you need it. You rock up to any VA hospital and you can still claim treatment to this day?
Well, probably too long a story to get into, but partly related to the peacetime segment that I described. I do not get 100% of the VA benefits that combat veterans do. I cannot walk into a VA hospital. Nope, I don't get that.
Well, that's a shame. You're still a
Um,
veteran.
yeah, it's a long story, but I truthfully, part of me in my own mind, I don't quibble about that. What I did get for from VA, they paid for a master's degree. I went to graduate school and got an MBA, and that was paid for through the VA. So I'm thankful for that. It was a bonus, and didn't have to pay a dime to go to graduate school. So
what did you do?
after the military,
Yeah, what was the
I, through a series of events looking for a job in the civilian world, I connected with an old college friend and went to work for a large regional bank here in Houston. It was, at the time, it was called Texas Commerce. It was about $17 billion bank. In the U.S., we were still in what was considered unit banking laws. There was no interstate banking. You couldn't have branches of a bank across the state line, nor could you have branches across cities. You had to have unit banks in each location. So what we had was a holding company. We had 71 banks spread across the state of Texas that were part of our holding company, but each one by charter was technically a separate bank.
It was all the money sort of centrally in one pot, or was it just individual banks, but so the holding company was just sit over the top of it all?
Yeah, there was still it was the precursor to large scale branch banking, and branch banking did happen while I was at the bank in the early 80s, laws were changed both statewide and nationally in the U.S. that there could be branch banking allowed. And we rolled all of our 71 banks into just one giant network system.
I'm guessing there's an awful lot of benefits to having a central system where you've got central purchasing and all the rest of it. So
Right.
and you've got corporate
Right.
branding and everything like that, just to make life a lot easier for everybody
It did. Yes.
in the group.
Yeah.
So was it while you were there that you got funded by the VA to go and do the
No, I had actually done my graduate school while I was on active duty at Fort Rucker, Alabama. It was concurrent. I was going to night school, working days, and going to night school to get my MBA.
and what was it in?
So I had it was general business and operations management.
All right. So that sort of set you up for going into the bank then?
Yeah, it was a good segue into the bank, and because of my military background, I was actually recruited at the bank to go into the operations part of the bank and run support teams and various operational units. And that's what I did for the next 20 years. I stayed at the bank a full 20.
So what happened at the back end of that then? Why did you leave?
Well, banking was going through quite a bit of turmoil. I went through 3 different mergers, and my bank ultimately became JP Morgan Chase. And we became the Chase Bank of Texas. And so after the third one, I said, I've had as much fun as I would like in this game. And they were offering early retirement packages for folks. And I said, give me the money. I'm ready to go. So
So you took off like a scolded cat.
I
Took
took
the money
off.
and run.
I did as Jerry Maguire did in the movie, show me the money. I took the package and bolted out the door as fast as I could. No, but that sounds like I had bad feelings. I don't. It was a great experience and a whole lot of learning. One tidbit about that I'll share is our bank happened to be one of the best run organizations of its kind. And to prove that, most of the time I was there, we were on a string of running off 24 consecutive quarters of earnings growth. So 16 years we grew earnings quarter by quarter by quarter. And you can imagine Wall Street loved our stock, and our stock value was just phenomenal. And the big thing for me was the learning, the leadership team I became a part of, some of the disciplines we learned about budgeting, planning, managing, monitoring KPI, being held accountable, all of those things. I was young enough and knew enough to banking that I just thought, well, that's how all banks must run. And only later did I find, no, that's not true.
Do you think that was born out through your military experience, bringing the military ethos to the banking world, where I'm not quite sure about the American Army, but certainly the British Army or the British military, we go above and beyond the call of duty to get the job done.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
that's what probably makes us the best in the world, because we have this can-do attitude. And I have worked with Americans, and I've got a different opinion of that. But what was your experience coming from the military background into the banking world?
I think it definitely was a factor. And in fact, again, I alluded to several of the officers the bank officers that were recruiting me and doing the interviewing were themselves ex-military. So they felt an affinity there. And as we talked about various things with training and background and experience from the Army, they were sort of mentally checking boxes. And I think there was definitely a very direct transferability of mindset and operations. And I was given some good opportunities very early on in leadership roles. And it was just a given that because of my military background, they didn't challenge capability of moving into a role that might otherwise, not been given to somebody that didn't have that. So the transferability was definitely there, and I think the mindset about setting missions, setting visions, setting accountability, and delegation. Young managers in the civilian world struggle with the whole notion of delegating work.
Mm.
It's one of the common things that I do now as an executive coach, trying to help people. The person that has just come up through a civilian job opportunity, um, if they've been placed in management and they've made 2 or 3 promotions since then, they are still inevitably struggling with the idea of delegating. It's like I have a person on my team. They're not as equally equipped as I am. It's just easier for me to do it myself. And in the military, of course, you don't do that at all. You immediately delegate, and if the person can't perform, you get them to training. You give them more training, and you make sure they learn how to perform.
Absolutely. So is that what you did when you got your package after 20 odd years in the bank? Did you then set up on your own as a coach, or did you transfer into something else first?
Well, I did something else first. I did what classic bankers do when they retire. They become consultants. And so I created a small consulting company and was doing work for many years with my old bank customers. So we had the relationships and they had the need. And again, I was doing a lot of operations, process improvement, technology migrations, technology implementations. But what I realized along the way was that most of my consulting clients really wanted to talk about coaching issues. They would call me in after I'd been on the job a few weeks, and they would have a topic they wanted just to bounce off somebody that wasn't in their chain of command. It would be an idea about a problem they were having, or maybe about their own boss, or just any number of things. And we would sit there and talk about it, and not necessarily directly related to our consulting project at all, but just their own leadership challenge. And didn't think a lot about that at first. I just enjoyed the opportunity to do that. But as years went on, and I started to get tired of the travel that went with consulting, as many consultants do, I started exploring what other alternatives there might be, and the idea of becoming an executive coach seemed to be the solution. So I pursued some training in that area, and through a series of events, I actually go all the way back to 2008. I consider the real launch of my coaching business, because I was doing a lot of work in a nonprofit organization helping people in career transition. I actually started the nonprofit when we had the big financial crash in 2008.
Mm. Yeah, I mean that affected an awful lot of people around the world, not
Yeah,
just in America.
yeah.
So that's where your business that you do now was born, I guess.
Yep, it really was. And then, like I said, I augmented what I already knew from practical experience about building teams and creating businesses to basically help other people do that.
So how did you go about setting that business up?
Not too dissimilar from a couple of other businesses I had started, just from a pure technical standpoint. Went and prepared and filed all the right papers to set up an LLC and get that going. But more importantly, it was about getting the word out that I was going to be available and doing this. So I took advantage of a lot of the technology that's out there with websites and social media and those kinds of channels to spread the word that I was coaching. And today, similar to yourself, I have a podcast that's got quite a good following that I'm very happy about. And we publish 3 shows a week.
Wow.
Title of the series is Leadership Powered by Common Sense. We talk about all things it takes to be an effective business leader and cover really the full waterfront. I mean, a wide spectrum of topics that we get into on that show.
So how can people pick up on that show if they want to listen in and maybe engage with it?
We're on just about every major streaming service, Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, Pandora. Again, the name of the show is Leadership Powered by Common Sense.
Yeah, that's that's something that's in short supply a lot of the time. Common sense.
Well, that's exactly the genesis of the idea. I have struggled over my career running into people that have been designated as a leader over me, and they're not demonstrating a lot of common sense. And so I've always found that and to your point, this goes back to the military training. The military is big on the keep it simple, stupid. And be very direct and very clear. Don't let it get complicated, because another saying that I'm a big fan of is a confused mind says no. So if you're leading a team and you're putting out a bunch of jargon in your instruction and you see the eyes glazed over in the audience, you better search for some clarity, because your people are confused and they're going to basically say no to the assignment, whatever it may be.
So, how did the pandemic affect you? How did you get on?
I
during
got to be
lockdown?
honest. I have not run numbers. I should probably run numbers, but my sense is my activity just about doubled during the pandemic. I had a lot more demand for doing coaching with people, helping people figure out trouble they were having. As an example, I was running a mastermind group. I had 12 business owners, local Houston area business owners, that were on this mastermind with me. When the pandemic hit, we had been meeting only once a month as a group. They begged and pleaded that we meet every week as a group to try to share ideas, explore answers, and just be a support group for each other. And 2 of the members there in that group sadly had to close their businesses because of the pandemic. Others survived and stayed strong and recovered. But it was touch and go for a lot of people for a long time there, just because of the sheer uncertainty of what the pandemic was bringing to us. Nobody knew.
Yeah. So you managed to do very well out of the pandemic.
Yep.
And that brings us kind of up to date then. do you still do most of your business online now? Or...
I am. Yeah, I do virtually all of my business. And that was the other thing about the pandemic. I essentially had been working from home for 25 years. So the remote work thing was a non-event for me. I was already had my equipment. I was already wired for the remote connectivity with people. So, and I was already working at home, so I didn't have to adjust anything. I didn't have to figure out a new lifestyle. But yeah, it's just about 100% remote. I have a few local clients that I'll engage with. You know, we'll go out and have a coffee or a lunch or something periodically just to stay fresh. But just about everything is virtual.
Well, Doug, thank you. I've enjoyed that. That's been really insightful.
Well, I appreciate it, Tim. Appreciate the opportunity. And, you know, if there's anything I can do for you or any of the guests on your show, happy to help.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.